Ashley here, and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new, welcome. I'm so glad you found me. I'm doing a fun little tutorial today. This is a little bit different than my other tutorials. This is more of a craft applique tutorial, and I don't know about where you are, but here in Indiana it's starting to cool down a little bit. We are in mid-August, so does that mean it's spooky season? I got my spooky mama shirt on. Anyways, I'm just kidding, but I am doing a little Halloween project today. And what we are going to be making is we are going to be making these little ghosts. So I have a couple different options and a couple different methods I'm going to show you. They are so cute, and these are made with macrame rope, and there is a method to sew them or a no sew method. So I will show you both of those. So if you are looking for a specific method, I'm going to show you how to make them individually like this, show you how to do the sewing method, attaching them to project or piece of fabric, whatever you want. And then I'm also going to show you a no sew method for making them on fabric. So let's get started. To get started, I'm just going to go over the supplies that you are going to need. So I'm going to cover the supplies for every single method here, but the main things you're going to need is you're going to need macrame cord, which this is a 3mm. I wouldn't recommend going any smaller. You can go larger, and that's going to give you kind of a more chunky look, but going any smaller, unless you're doing the no sew method, I would not recommend because it would be too hard to put together. But I will put a link for this in the description. I get this off of Amazon, and this is going to last me forever, and it's relatively inexpensive. And then you're going to need a ruler and scissors. Now the other ones are kind of optional / dependent on which method you are doing. So if you are doing the sewing method, there's two different methods for the sewing method, and one is to sew it directly onto your fabric like these, or the other is to create, this one my kids drew on. They like these, they think they're fun to play with, but the other method is to sew it onto a piece of paper or wash away stabilizer and then pull it off, and then you can have a bunch of individual little ghosts. I just use newspaper paper. It's a really thin, kind of if you think about like coloring book paper, where it's real thin and fine. It's a lot finer than printer paper, but it's not as thin as like a tissue paper that is potentially going to rip as you're sewing it and just be a hassle to work with. And then I have marking tools. I have chalk and a marker. Typically I would use something that blends in a little bit more to my fabric. If I'm sewing directly on a fabric, like I would use like this yellow that's pretty light, but I'm going to be using dark colors here to show you. Or you can use chalk or like a friction pen that will disappear in heat. You can use like blackboard chalk. It doesn't need to be a specific tailor's chalk like this. And then I have a Elmer's glue stick. This is not necessary, but highly recommend this, and I will explain why here in a minute. And then if you are doing the no sew option, you are going to need E6000, which I'll put a link to this down below. You can buy it in separate tubes like this. I think they come in a pack of like 3 in the little tubes, or you can buy a big tube. I like the little tubes. They just are easier to work with, and the other ones usually end up drying out before you use them all. I think these are a little bit more per unit, but again, like I said, it doesn't really save you any money if you end up throwing out the other stuff. And then you're going to need scissors and a ruler. So first let's talk about our ghost sizing. Now you can do these in all different sizes as you see, and like I said, the size of cord that you're using is going to affect the sizing as well. And really the best way to figure out what size you want and what size your ghost is going to end up is by making some test ghost. So you're going to want to get some test fabric, some scrap fabric, and write down the measurements you're using to kind of figure out how big your ghost is going to turn out. And you can kind of play with it and see how big you want it. So these are all different sizes. Most of them are the same width. This one's a little bit skinnier. This one looks skinnier because it's tall and skinny. So just play with it, figure out which style you like, and the more you do it, the better they will look. So like this one was, I think, the very first one I did, and you can see how it doesn't look great. And this is the most recent one I did, and the face even looks nice, and even the bottom is, and all the stitches. So you just get a little bit more comfortable with it. So I definitely recommend doing 4 or 5 practice ones, and then also you can kind of see if they're coming out looking the same size and go from there. But the next thing I recommend is, depending on what you're using these for, like I have seen these used on pillows. People sew them on the front of pillows. I am wanting to actually make a tote bag and put these on them. I think they'll be really cute. These do come in other colors too, so if you wanted to do like orange, or there's even like a stark white, but I like this color and I'm going to stick with it for what I am doing. But just like I said, there's always the option of different colors. And the other thing I forgot that you're going to need is you're going to want a matching thread to your rope color. So I just used white. You can see it blends in pretty well there, and then I used black for the face. So you're just going to want to pick your colors that you want there. Not doing the sew method, you're also going to need some sort of black fabric. You can use felt, or I mean you could draw them on, but really doesn't look very nice. But you could also use like a puffy paint or something like that. So that's just something else to note. But once you figure out what your project is, how big it is, then you can kind of figure out how big you want your ghost, and then figure out how you need to cut your pieces to make your ghost that size. And then you're going to want to kind of, especially if you're sewing them directly on, you're going to want to map out, and that's what I would use the chalk or the marker for, to mark the ghost location so that you know that it's going in the right spot and it's going to be even and straight. So that's just what I would use the chalk for. But the first thing we are going to do is we are going to start, I'm going to set these aside, with sewing our ghost directly onto our fabric. And this is a great method, one, if you don't really care about the back, because you are going to have a lot of stitching lines. Now on a tote bag or something, you may be bothered by that being on the inside of it. So if you're going to be worried about that, then I would do the method of creating the ghost and then attaching it to the fabric afterwards. So just food for thought there. The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to cut a 5-inch piece, and again, this is going to kind of depend on how big you want your ghost and how tall you want it, but I like to start with just like about 5 inches. And what I am going to do is I'm now going to take my glue stick and I'm going to pinch this in half with the bottoms together and just kind of lather on this glue to this back side here, and then I'm going to flip it over. And this is where, if you wanted to, you could mark where you want your piece, and I would mark where you wanted the bottom of it, because we're going to be working outwards. So I would mark your bottom, and then maybe you can mark how tall you wanted it, so that then you know when you're done as well. But I just would probably, like if I was doing this on a pillow or something, I would take my chalk, mark a straight line, and then mark the bottom, and then line this piece up with the bottom. But just remember that this piece is not the height of your final ghost, because like in here, my first piece is ending like right about the mouth, so it grows as we do this. But you just want to make sure that this is straight and flat, and that is the first step. And then now we're going to go over to our sewing machine, and I'm going to take you over there and show you how to turn this into a ghost. All right, so the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that your machine is set to a zigzag stitch. I'm going to just do a zigzag, and I like to do this at about a 2.5 to a 3 length. Again, this is going to be just dependent on what you like, what you want, but you are going to want to set a wide stitch width because you're going to do a zigzag and it is going to go over both pieces of your rope, and that's what's going to hold them together. And I will be using black thread just so that you guys can easily see my stitches. So I come over to my machine and I have my piece that is glued down with that stick, and I bring over my spool and a pair of scissors. So the first thing that we're going to do is we want our needle to be heading in the downward position just so we can kind of line it up. So you can see here the top part of my rope loop, and I'm going to slide it so that the top is just past my needle, and my needle kind of lines up with right here. You can, it's actually purple from the glue, which this glue will dry clear, so that's why you don't have to worry about it. But I'm gonna line my needle up right about here and put my presser foot down, and I want the center of my strings here to be in the center of my presser foot, so that as I put my needle down, you can see it's hitting this rope, and then as I move to the next one, it's going to go over and go down into the other one. So now I am going to just slowly sew down here, making sure that as my needle goes, it's alternating which rope it hits in, and this stays nice and straight going through my presser foot. And now we want our ghost to have little hairy bottoms, like these little frills. And so what I like to do is I like to leave extra and then trim it all at the end. So I'm gonna sew to about where I made this mark over here, just to right here, and slowly sew there. And then I'm going to stop and leave my needle down in there, and then I will show you what's next. All right, so I'm going to just hand crank my needle down, leave it in. I'm going to lift my presser foot up, and then I'm going to rotate my piece all the way around so that it is upside down. And now this is where I'm going to take the rope from my spool, and I like to just leave it hooked on. I just do, you can see here, a long tail. There's my spool, and then leave it hanging, and then I'll just trim it for the next one so I don't have to worry about the size. And so I'm just going to put this piece in here and butt those sides up as much as you can and kind of line up the bottoms, but I don't have to worry about the bottom too much because, again, I said I was going to trim it. And then I'm going to put my presser foot down, and again I'm just going to leave this. And so I don't worry about gluing it now because I have this to kind of use as my anchor and my guide. So I am going to just slowly stitch to about here to where it starts to turn, and then I'm going to pivot. So I'm going to sew this part here. I'm going to put my needle down, and here you're going to just have to kind of start pivoting, and you may have to just do even by hand and kind of turn one or two stitches at a time, just making sure your needle is hitting both of those cords. And then straighten it out, and then you're going to sew down and stop at the same spot as the others. I'm going to just flatten that out. Okay, and then now I'm going to just trim this roughly at the same spot, and then again leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, rotate it backwards. So then we're just going to keep repeating this process. I'm going to put this in here, line it up, make it about the same length as my bottom, put my presser foot down, make sure there's no gap in there. and then just start here, and then again close that gap. And then start to pivot. Go now. The more rows you do, the easier this curve is going to be because it's not as sharp. So then I'm just going to keep sewing, pivoting. Straighten it out, and then sew down to the bottom. And then when I am done, I'm going to trim this one. I like to just pull it out and typically leave a longer tail, and then I'll just take a hand needle and put this in and then pull it through to the back and then tie a knot, and the same thing up here at the top if my thread didn't get caught in the other rope. So you can see here, this is my first thread, so I'm just going to trim it because it is tucked back behind the other one, so it's not going to come out. And so I'm just going to put this, pretend I pulled it back, and then you are just going to decide how long you want the tails and trim this off, and always err on the side of too long because just like anything, you can make them shorter, but you can't add length. And then you just want to take your finger and kind of fluff them up, and your ghost is done. And obviously this is why you want to use matching thread, because right now this doesn't look the best, but I just wanted to do it so you can kind of see my stitch path there and how I was pivoting and going to the next row. And up here they're going to be tighter because you're going at more of an angle and a sharper curve there. So you can choose to leave it like this, or now we can go ahead and add the eyeballs. So what you want to do is you're going to switch your thread to your color that you want to do the eyes and the mouth. You could do them different colors if you wanted to, like you could do a red or pink mouth to make it look like they're a girl, whatever. It's totally up to you. But now what you want to do is you want to adjust your stitch width to the width that you want your eyeballs. Again, this is going to be very dependent on the size of your ghost and just what you're looking for, and the same thing with the size of your mouth. So I'm going to just take a marker and draw kind of where I want the eyes and where I want the mouth. And I am going to turn my stitch length down to about a 0.8, and then I'm going to leave my zigzag, and I'm going to keep my stitch width pretty wide. I'm going to go to a 4 for these. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put my little dot I made right under my needle, and I'm going to hand crank it down so I can kind of see where it's going to line up, and then adjust my ghost. And now how long you want it is also going to be dependent on what you want. So I'm going to do about 4 stitches forward, and then I'm going to put my reverse on and back stitch 4, and just go up and down a couple times to really fill in that eyeball. So I'm going to take this off here and just show you again. It obviously looks better when your other stitching isn't black, but you can see how it really filled that in. And then I'm just gonna go and do the same thing on this eyeball and set it up with my needle and my marking. And then I'm just gonna hop down to my mouth. And I like to do the mouth a little bit longer than the eyes. Just I think it looks a little bit cuter that way, and so I'm going to my machine is biting me here, so I'm going to just cut this, but I'll show you. So I would have filled the mouth in a little bit more and done it maybe a little bit longer, but I think it's super cute. And now your eyeballs and your mouth are probably not going to be perfect, and they're all going to look a little bit different, but I think that just adds to the character of the ghost. Like here's this one. This was the first one that I tried the eyes, so that's why they're a little bit messed up. But in the mouth, this one I did a little mouth on. So they're all just however you want to do it. And you just have to be okay with it not being perfect, because it is a ghost and ghosts are meant to be a little funny, at least in my eyes. Okay, so then the last thing you want to do with your little dude is just trim off these. These you don't have to worry about backstitching or tying down, because we did them so tight and we were backstitching back and forth on those. So it's really just going to lock those in place. So you don't have to worry about it. So then your little ghost is done. And if you want to, you can trim these a little bit more, but you don't need to, depending on what you like. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to make one without the fabric, like these little dudes. And you can do them without the paper. You can just do the rope in your machine and just put it in and sew it, and then just keep doing it. It is just a little bit easier if you have something to stabilize the rope as you're sewing. So I'm going to show you how to do it on the paper, which is basically the same as doing it on the fabric. So again, I'm going to cut 5 inches, and I am going to cut out a square for my paper bigger than my ghost. And this is also a good way too, if you wanted to be more precise on how long you want your tails or where you stop your stitching, you can use the paper as an edge. I'm just going to line my ends up with the end of my paper. But again, I'm going to just take my glue stick here and put some glue on it and flip it over in the middle. And then I'm just going to take this over to my machine and do exactly the same thing that I did for this one. I am going to switch to white thread now though, just because we know what it looks like on this one. So I'm going to switch to white thread so that we can get the full effect of what our actual ghost is going to look like. Alright, so then as I said for the paper one, I am just going to sew this up and do the exact same steps that I did on the one on the fabric, and then I will show you what we're going to do after that. Alright, so I have my little ghost friend sewn up, and here's the back. And so now what we're going to do is we are going to rip the paper off, and this is why you want something pretty fine and easy to rip off. And if you're going to be hooking the back to something, it doesn't matter quite as much, but this is going to rip off pretty easily on the outsides, and then the insides might be a little bit harder to get out, but one, it may not really matter if it's in there, but you just want to pull it out, and it might help too if you get it a little bit wet, but you just want to be careful that you're not pulling it off. This is why a water-soluble stabilizer might be helpful, because then you can just basically disintegrate the backing with water. But you can just, if you need to, pick the backing off. And this, it does take a little bit of time, but it's something that you could, you know, sew them up and then at night sit down and pull these out while you're watching TV. Kind of just like if you're doing paper piecing like that. But I'm not going to sit here and make you watch all of that, but I will say it does take a little bit of time. So the thinner the paper you use, the easier it will be to pull them off. So like a tissue paper, the only thing with the tissue paper is it is pretty thin, so you just be careful when you're sewing it to not rip it or anything. But then you could also add the eyes when it was hooked to the paper, or just do it now, and then when you are ready, just give it a nice little trim like this one. We're gonna just leave it long. We're gonna see what it looks like when we give it a long tail. We're going to just fluff all of these ends, unravel them, and that's kind of cute too, like that. And then you could leave it, or you could add the eyeballs. And then real quick, I'm just going to show you how I would start one without any of the paper. And as I said, this is probably the hardest method to do, but then it doesn't involve having to pick off paper from the back. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just cut my strip like I would all the others. And so the hardest part of doing it without any of the paper is getting it started here at the beginning. And so what you need to do is you need to fold it, keep those heads together just like we did before, and get it under your presser foot. You want to get it a little bit further back, so the top of mine is kind of lined up with my I can't think of the name, the like neck that holds my presser foot, and that's so that it will pull forward. So then I'm going to get my pieces as close as I can, and if they aren't quite together, I will use something to push it in, like a pencil. I'm using my my seam ripper to just kind of push it in and get it lined up there. And I like to hand crank my first couple, holding this together, and then I'm going to pull my tails back behind while holding these. And I'm gonna actually like physically pull these pretty aggressively, not like to rip them off, but enough to pull this through, because it is under there and you don't want it to get caught up in there. The other thing you could do is you could put something under it to use as like a hump jumper, because if you see, my presser foot is kind of angled down, and so it makes it a little bit harder for it to get through this back part. So you could put another piece of rope back there, and this is kind of the same for the fabric ones. So like I could just take this and put it right here, and that'll help even out my presser foot, and that's just gonna pop right out once I get sewn. But again, I'm still gonna pull these threads and just start sewing. So you can see that back piece pushing out, and so now we're done with that. And then I'm just going to hold these together and sew until I'm where I want to stop, and then I'm just going to pivot and again continue on just like I did. Just add it in and push this in to get it lined up, and sew on. And then you would just keep doing that like the others until you are done. And so like this guy, we made him pretty small, and there's him. And then you can add his eyeballs. This was, I probably wouldn't make them this small, but, and I will show you on this one, you can see when I went around that curve, I did this one just really quickly and wasn't really paying attention, but I did miss this section there. So if that happens, you don't want to leave it because that looks not the best. What I would do, honestly, is I would just put it back under and just go over it again. And now you can't even tell. I mean, there's some extra stitches, but you can't really see them. So that's just one way to fix that if you do happen to miss a section in your zigzag. So the very last option is a no sew option, and that is what I said you need this E6000 glue for. This is going to stick to pretty much anything, fabric, glass, whatever you want. So what we're gonna do for this one, this is really quick and easy. So we're just gonna cut our first piece. Here you can be a little bit more exact on how long you want it. So I am gonna trim this down. I'm gonna make this guy pretty little. So you're just gonna take your glue, can't open it. And I'm just doing this on paper, but you can do it on whatever you want. You're just going to, you wanna make it, put a decent amount on so that it sticks. You need to make it wide enough so that you get both pieces. And then you're going to just take it, and you want to make sure that you remember to leave your little tails at the bottom and push them together up at the top, close that middle seam, and then you just take your glue around, again making sure you leave space for the tails, and just go right around the edge like that, and then add your rope. Just push it down. Trim. And because this doesn't dry instantly, so you might want, you might act like when I did that, it pulled off a little bit. So you just need to adjust it, push it down, and then you just keep adding a row of glue. And you don't want to put too much glue on that it's like sopping out the sides, but you want to put enough glue on that you're getting it on your piece, especially because, like, as we know with the bottoms, this does unravel. So if you only get like a little piece here, it could very easily unravel and then not look good after a little bit. So I'm just going to finish this piece, and I'm going to cut the bottom, and then I would wait until it was dry to trim the bottom, just because you don't want to like pull it apart on accident and then you mess it up. So just really push it down there good. And on your last row, you want to make sure you keep your glue on the inside, like you can see here. I wasn't very careful, so I would do one more row, but I wasn't really planning on this being my last row. So you just want to make sure that on that last row you keep the glue inside, and you may even want to just kind of more so put it along the edge of the previous piece instead of more on the material that you're adding it on. But then your ghost is done. Like I said, you want to let it dry. And you can see here how it's just a little bit poofier. It doesn't get flattened down. Like when you sew it, it does squish down a little bit, but it also squishes those pieces together. So it does give you a similar look, but not quite the same. So part of it may depend on the final look you're going for, or just maybe you can't sew. And this is the only option for you. Doesn't matter, there's no right or wrong way. But then we are going to take whatever you want. This is just some scrap black fabric I have, and you can cut it down to size. You can use a felt. I just cut these, they are too big, so I just was getting some scraps. So you just want to keep cutting them until you figure out how big you want them, where you want them. You can also use like a puffy paint, or you could put little rhinestones, that would be cute on it. Really whatever you want, or you don't even have to use eyeballs or anything, as I showed you. They're cute without it, but it is definitely up to you and that final look you're going for. And I would just recommend, if you're doing like the fabric, play with it first. If you're doing a bunch of them, do a couple, see if you can get the look you are wanting. And then, like, I don't know, I think he looks kind of goofy, but see if you can get the look you're going for before you decide that's the path you want to take. Like, honestly, I'm not really a huge fan of that, but I could probably play with it and get it to look a little bit better if you had tools or hole punches or something to round them out. But I do think that little like black gems would be really cute if you're trying to go for like an elevated look. Even on these, you could glue them. I would again use this glue. That concludes our ghost tutorial, and if you remember, we did, this one was the one on the paper. I still haven't removed the paper back from it. This one is the one I did without any paper or anything behind it. Sewing with this guy. These are so cute. I love these. My kids love them too, so if you sew them up, they play with them, carry them around, their little ghost. And this was the one I did on the fabric. I love these. I am obsessed with them. I could just make ghost all day, and they're super quick. They take like a couple minutes per ghost. And then this was the one that we glued on, and then, as I mentioned, once it is dry, you can trim the bottom and fluff it up, but you want to wait until it's dry, and you just want to read the instructions on the glue. I don't remember what it is, but it's a couple hours at least to dry them. And I will say, you could do this without the paper behind it to make them separate with the glue. You would just want to put the glue on the outside. I'm not sure how well they would stay together though without being stabilized by the paper, because I haven't tried that method, but you could do that. I probably wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it would really hold the best, because like, as I mentioned, when I was doing those just with this material, I think it would probably unravel pretty easily without being stabilized by the stitching or some other type of material. But as I mentioned, anything that I used in this tutorial, I will link down below. And if you do sew these up, make sure you share them on Instagram and tag me. I love to see what you make, and I would love to see your little ghosties and what you can do with them, because really the possibilities of what you can do with these are just limitless. There's so many things. Like I said, they can even be little toys. I think I want to make try to do a big one and make like little coasters for them for our tables. I think that would be super fun and cute. You know, just keep going and keep adding rows. But if I do try that, I will share it on my Instagram, so make sure you follow me. It's at Sewbex. It's SEWBEXX. And if you have any questions about this, feel free to leave a comment down below, and I would be happy to help. You can also reach out to me on my Instagram page, and I would be happy to help there with these or just anything else sewing. But other than that, go make your ghost, have fun, and thanks for watching.